Well, hello everybody. Welcome to this fourth masterclass looking at the level 4 syllabus changes. Welcome to the participants joining us today. It's fantastic to have you on the call today. Thank you so much for joining. While we are waiting for everybody to join the call, because there's quite a few of you, please use the chat function to introduce yourselves to us, the team here at CIPS, and to each other. Please share where you are, where you're located, what you've been doing today, something interesting about yourself, where you are in your CIPS journey as well. Share where you are. Get to know the people that are on this call. It will be great to hear your stories. As I say, there's quite a few people that are joining, so we're going to leave a couple of minutes before we start the presentation proper. But before we do the presentation, I would like to introduce you to my esteemed colleagues here at CIPS, who are really the people that make these webinars happen and all of your learning happen as well. So we'll just go around the room and introduce my colleagues. So we'll start with Natalie. Afternoon.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here today. My name's Natalie and I work for the events team here at CIPS, and today I'll be running the webinar behind the scenes.
Thanks, Natalie. Great to have you on the call. Hi, Claire. How are things in the study centres?
Hi, Fiona, and hello, everybody else across the world. All good in the world of study centres. For those of you who don't know, I'm Claire Winton, and I work with the study centres that deliver our qualifications, supporting them in delivering high quality education to those of you that choose that route to learn.
Thanks, Claire. Great to have you on the call today. Next, we have Luke. Afternoon, Luke.
Hi, Fiona. Hi, everyone. I'm Luke Wemban. I'm Head of Assessment and Awarding at CIPS. So similarly, like Claire, I support the assessment team to ensure that we deliver the right assessments to the right level, to the right standard, and that we ensure that you get your results when you need those. And we help and support where we can across the rest of CIPS to ensure that everything we do is geared towards delivering, the best possible experience for our learners. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thanks, Luke. And finally, but by no means least, Andrea, hi.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. Best of luck for your upcoming exams. My name is Andrea. I'm in the customer service team, and basically we do all the admin bits for the membership and guiding you through your studies.
Thank you, and thank you so much for all the work you do. So as you can see, colleagues, we've got a whole group of people standing ready to answer your questions. So I will let you all turn off your cameras while we start the presentation. Thank you so very much for answering the questions that our learners may pose over this next hour. So with regard to how to do questions, please use the Q&A chat box that you'll see within the Zoom function area. Please ask all of your questions in that way. And as you can see, we've got a good group of people here at CIPS that stand ready to help you with those queries that you have. Pardon me, please use the chat box, as I say, for just informal chats amongst yourselves and as an introduction area. But if there's comments that you want to make, please pop those through the Q&A area. Brilliant. Okay, so before we get on to the presentation proper, I have a further question to ask you, please. Natalie's going to put up a poll in just a sec, and that poll is really going to ask you, are you planning to take exams in March? So please, if you wouldn't mind just filling that in for me, please. You might have been on 1, 2, or even all 3 of these webinars in the last little while, and you'll have seen this each time, but we're collecting that information. So kindly pop that in, and that will be brilliant, and we'll close that down in just a second. Thank you. So we can see that most of us are turning our minds quite rapidly now to preparing for our exams in March. 85%, that's more than 100 people on this call, are here because you want to prepare for your exams. So just a word on that, and just to remind you, I know you'll be receiving lots of information from CIPS on how to do that, but just remember, exam bookings open on the 23rd. They only stay open for 3 weeks. So before the exam bookings open, it is worth bearing in mind and planning ahead as to when you want to sit your exam. So refer to the exam schedule on the CIPS website. I will send you the link through so that you can be planning when it is that you want to be sitting those exams, so it's not going to be a flurry when you get to the exams, to the booking window. Brilliant. Thank you for that. And the what else did I want to say? Oh, yes, before we move on further, just to remind you, we will be sending every participant who's registered onto this webinar a recording or a link to the recording of this video. So if you have to drop off, don't worry, we will send you a copy of the video so that you've got that for your revision. So hopefully that answers some of the queries that might come up here or might be in your mind at the moment. Cool. All righty. So so the next thing for us to do is to move on to really looking at this last part of the kind of changes that we're doing to the CIPS level 4 syllabus changes that you'll see coming up in your March exams. You know who I am. My name's Fiona Wood, and I'm Group Head of Learning and Standard at CIPS. And it's been a pleasure to work with you and talk you through these syllabus changes. So let's do it this fourth time. So what we're looking at today really is the ESG. So we're still thinking, we're still kind of following through on the ESG thinking. We're thinking about environmental, social, and governance. This kind of concept that we've introduced into the CIPS level 4 syllabus, and we're just dealing with the second part of that in this webinar. So just to reorientate you, last time we were looking at this kind of environmental piece over here on the left-hand side, and we spent a bit of time thinking about the importance of ED&I and how we kind of make that a real thing, both in terms of managing our teams, recognizing it in how we manage our suppliers and how we bring that to life. This time we are looking at the other side of this. We're looking at the governance and the social piece. So now we're looking at the grey elements of this. So before we move on, we need to just refresh our minds as to what ESG is. So this is a measure of the sustainability, and it's an assessment that includes environmental, social, and governance considerations. So we really need to just keep hold of that idea. ESG is all about bringing the whole concept of thinking about sustainability into bringing it to life, making it projects that you can actually work on. We're thinking here about the sort of practical application of CSR, corporate social responsibilities, which tend to be very strategic in their nature. ESG brings those whole ideas to life, practical things we can do with suppliers that will make a difference. Just reiterating the benefits of this, ESG policies think about the use of suppliers with sustainability credentials, so trying to get suppliers thinking in that way, and this will ensure that we have supply chains that are of lower risk, so things are less likely to go wrong. Active management of waste and embracing concepts of recycling means that you've got cost reduction opportunities, time-saving opportunities, as well as improving environmental credentials as well. And making contributions to local projects and infrastructure and charities enhances your reputation, but it also does something for the local community, and you may be drawing your workforce from that local community, and in that way it's quite cyclical as well. So doing good things for your local community has an impact on your potentially your own workforce. And finally, the use of ethical codes and CIPS codes of ethics really does make sure that you've got that alignment of conduct and values throughout the organization, throughout your function of procurement and supply, and within each individual that's working there. So you all know that you're pulling in the same direction. So we thought about last time, or considered this idea of your stakeholders, thinking about your suppliers and how you may make ESG a real thing for your suppliers, how you can make it impactful for your local community, for your customers who might have some very strong views on what good ESG looks like, the government who may be wanting your opinion, but equally may be putting in regulations that you need to comply with. Your lenders and owners will have views on what ESG needs to look like in your organization. And many employees have strong views around ESG as well. So thinking about ESG in the stakeholder world is really an effective way of thinking about how, as procurement and supply professionals, we can bring together all of these different stakeholders into practical projects that make a difference. So, so where we are thinking about today is we're thinking about the governance of this. So on, I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? Yesterday we were talking about the environmental and social elements of it. Now we're thinking about how is this governed? What is the policy infrastructure that's necessary to support ESG? And what I've done is I've highlighted for us really where you can expect to see governance and ESG things coming through in your kind of in your studies. So governance is part of L4M1. It's your sector knowledge. It's thinking about how different organizations from different sectors really deal with the governance of ESG. How do private sector organizations deal with it compared with how do public sector organizations think about ESG and the importance of governance in particular. Governance also falls into L4M4 in the form of ethics, and we'll talk a bit about ethics shortly. And governance also comes into thinking about in L4M7, whole life asset management. How do you take care and what are the policy arrangements around how you take care of your assets, how you look after that whole life asset management? What are the governance procedures that sit around that? Those are really important and can really drive some very powerful change within procurement and supply. And finally, but by no means least, the application of ESG governance principles within L4M8. Remember, this is your constructive response essay type questions where thinking about how the governance infrastructure might impact your ESG decisions will be really important. So really this slide is to highlight to you that ESG and governance in particular we look at this in detail in at least 50% of the CIPS modules. And in the other modules, things like negotiation and contract management, they're still there as the golden thread of things that we do and things that we stand for in procurement and supply, but they're not drawn out in quite the same way as they are in these 4 modules. But just to highlight the fact that always be aware, everything that we do within procurement and supply has an ESG impact. So let's think about, now we're thinking proper governance here. So policy then is the first area that we're going to be thinking about. Before we start on thinking about policy, I'd just like to have a short reflection on the use of the CIPS resources. As I mentioned yesterday when we spoke about the other part of ESG, so where we were looking at environmental considerations, etc., I mentioned to you how the old CIPS study guides, the red ones that many of you may have or seen reference to, has a huge amount of information that is relevant to sustainability. And that was the term that we used in the old syllabus. Now we've updated that term, but the principles of sustainability and ESG remain very similar. And so it is quite possible to use the CIPS red study guides as long as you're thinking about this sustainability using the phrase ESG, or using and breaking sustainability down into environmental, social and governance. Provided you do that, you should find that the red books or the new blue books are equally adequate in preparing you for the exams that you've got coming up. So while we're very proud of the new blue books, they've got lots of new information in them, it's also worth bearing in mind that if you have those red books with a bit of, with engaging in these webinars, looking at the CIPS website for extra resources, you are in a good place, provided you're really kind of across that whole idea of ESG as opposed to sustainability. So what I'm just about to tell you then, you will find references to in the old red study guides and in the new blue study guides, because policies really is something that hasn't changed significantly, but the terminology may have. So policy is sometimes thought of as quite a dull kind of idea for us within procurement and supply. It's the kind of rule book, if you like, that the organization really signs up to, and therefore maybe not the most thrilling thing for us to think about in procurement and supply. But do you know what? The objectives of the organization have a really big impact on how the policies, and particularly the governance policies, play out in an organization. So I just want to take us a step back and for us to think about objectives of an organization before we move forward and think about policy. So what you'll see here is on the left-hand side here, you've got a little grid that really thinks about the kind of three buckets of organization structure that we think about in CIPS: the public sector, the private sector, and the third sector. And I know that there's variations in between, but this kind of works for these kind of very kind of crude demarcations. We know that the objectives of public sector organizations really has that kind of overarching view of benefiting the taxpayers, benefiting people in society. And that's what public sector organizations are set up to do. So there's very much a kind of consideration on when we're thinking about what public sector organizations seek to do is to achieve maximum benefit for the money that they have. Because they're funded by taxpayers, and therefore because of that funding mechanism, taxpayers, not surprisingly, want to know where their money's going, and therefore public sector organizations need to offer principles of full transparency. They need to be able to defend and have their decisions scrutinized such that taxpayers feel that they are able to challenge or able to understand how things how and why things are in the public sector. So the principles that in the public sector is that we kind of think about, well, the benefit of taxpayers is the objective, and therefore it's really important that those taxpayers can see the decisions that we're making. So transparency is really, really important. And as you can see there, therefore, on the right-hand side, you can see that objectives drive the amount of transparency that the organizations need to sign up to. Here's the contrast. In private sector organizations, and remember, private sector organizations are in the business of profit, of creating profit for their owners. That's what they are, key objective. This may be in the form of money in terms of like just sheer profit. It may be in an objective of growing market share, or indeed there may well be an objective of growth generally in terms of sales numbers, etc. It all boils down to actually just however, the achievement of profit, providing a return to those funding stakeholders, be they the banks in the form of payment of their interest, and shareholders in the sharing out of the profits. So private sector organizations are set up to make a profit, and therefore the transparency that they are required to provide really is in the form of the financial returns. So these are the financial returns that they have to submit to Companies House here in the UK, the profit and loss statements, the balance sheets, the year-end figures that they need to submit. Beyond that, they have some statutory returns that they may have to provide in terms of health and safety and other kind of elements. But in principle, the amount of transparency that private sector organizations need to provide is quite small when you compare it to the transparency requirements of the public sector. Now, many private sector organizations choose to provide greater transparency than they are required to do by law, but that's a choice. And therefore, the objectives of the organization, again, inform how much transparency there is. Finally, when we think about third sector organizations, these are charities, these are organizations that are, these objectives really, they're set up to benefit a particular interest group. And their really objectives are to make sure that they remain viable to support that interest group that they were set up to serve in the first place. They have regulatory transparency requirements offered by the Charity Commission, and to some extent they may need to offer financial returns as well. So the transparency picture within the third sector is mixed and variable. I mention all of these things really for you to just take a step back and think about what sort of organization am I working in, or what sort of organization am I dealing with? What sort of level of transparency is reasonable for me to expect from these sorts of organizations? Recognizing the amount of governance that goes on, the amount of transparency that's provided is contingent on the sort of objectives the organization has. So let's have a think now about the assessment of governments on supplier proposals. So this comes out of L4, M4, and this is Learning Objective 2.3. So really we need to think about how do we assess governance in supplier proposals? And really it goes back to that transparency point that I've just made, but really we need to think about, well, what we're trying to do here is provide an objective assessment of the governance infrastructure that a supplier may have. And we want to test these things or understand these things to make sure that we are going to be selecting suppliers that are going to be able to, that will be a sustainable supplier, that won't run into governance issues, and will be straightforward to deal with. So thinking about that, we need to think about a few things. So governance really is made up of three elements in my view. It's made up of the policy infrastructure that we're kind of dealing with just now. It's thinking about the kind of ethics of the organization and how those ethics are operationalized, and indeed the controls that the organization has within that governance infrastructure, to what extent and what happens if things don't go as planned. So taking that step back and thinking about how do I assess the governance proposals from a supplier, this is what we need to think about. So let's think about the scope to start with. Well, governance, as we're talking about, it's part of that ESG infrastructure. So it is front and center and definitely something that we need to consider. My suggestion is that we assess components of governance individually against specific criteria. So you should have some criteria associated with ethics and what that looks like for you and what your criteria are, what their policy infrastructure looks like, and what their control environment looks like. And you'll have very particular requirements within your bid documentation, and you'll be looking for examples of that from your suppliers. One thing I think is really important is that, you know, it's difficult to judge as a procurement professional the governance environment of another organization when you're outside it. So it's really important to think really carefully about why each element of the governance infrastructure is needed. Why do you need to understand that? And think about why, and think about how you can assess that. And then think about its impact on the operation of the agreement that you're going to inevitably create. So think about that kind of pipeline of, I need to understand this governance infrastructure because I'm going to be putting in an agreement, which I am then going to have to potentially hold a supplier to. So understanding why you're asking for something and making sure that you can implement it and check it and monitor it it's an important thought process. Suppliers, in my experience, don't always provide you very clear governance documents, and it might well be that sometimes you'll need to ask for clarification. And if in doubt, seek clarification from the suppliers that have submitted information to you. It may be that they've made a mistake on their paperwork. It may be you need something explained to you. And it's absolutely fine to ask those questions. Much better to ask rather than have that question left in your head. So in summary, really, it's important to assess each part of the governance infrastructure separately. So assess policies, ethics, and controls all separately. Be very clear on what it is you're looking for. Be very clear on what good looks like for you, and very clear on how you're going to continue to monitor those things as you move through your relationship with that supplier. Let me just find the cursor. Okay, so let's think about policies in a little bit more detail then. So different sorts of policies. We've got ethics policies, which might cover modern slavery, environmental fraud, and personal conduct. We may have procurement policies within our own organization or within a supplier's organization that guide procurement procedures, risk sharing, contracting, sourcing arrangements, and so on. And I'm sure you can add to that list. You'll probably see policies from your suppliers and indeed policies within your own organization that relate to how you look after inventory, what your inventory policies are, and indeed how inventory is disposed of or how other assets might be disposed of as well. And finally, you may have policies that talk to things like payment terms, and indeed funding policies. The thing about all these policies is that this is not just one group of people within an organization that comes up with these policies. These are generally things that are discussed and created and collaborated on to achieve the right policy infrastructure for an organization. Why are these policies so important? Well, if we think about ethics, and we can do a whole session on ethics, but really kind of the whole ethics environment really is achieving ethical alignment with clear and transparent obligations for everybody just makes things much clearer and transparent so that everybody knows what it is that they need to be doing. Procurement policies and guiding our procedures make sure that we operate clear and fair, consistent approaches for all our suppliers, and we have clear operational processes for our staff. Well, our suppliers need to be treated fairly, because if they're not treated fairly, they soon won't be our suppliers, and it will be difficult for us to continue to work with those suppliers. So fairness makes sure that the right suppliers win the business. It makes sure that the right suppliers or suppliers are willing to participate in our in our bid processes going forward, because they feel that it's fair. If it's not fair, they're not going to bid for you, and that places you at a disadvantage. So making sure it's fair is really important. The inventory and disposal policies are really important, because these within inventory is a lot of value of a lot of money. And so the parameters for what stock you hold will not just be a procurement or an operations decision. These will be decisions that will be guided by the finance team as well. How much stock do you want to hold, for what period of time, how are disposals dealt with, and how does the organization think about the risks associated with those policies? Inventory has value, and therefore it ties up capital if you're holding inventory, if you're holding stock. We need to make sure that everybody understands what those risks are, because if you're tying the inventory or the stock up in capital, you can't use that money for anything else. So it's important to kind of make sure that that's understood. And finally, thinking about the whole idea of payments and payment terms and funding policies. Well, it's about clear and consistent expectations for all parties. Your suppliers need to know what your payment terms are. Your customers need to know what their payment terms are. Your banks will have some expectations on what needs to be paid to them. And you will have some particular policies around how new products are created, and what sorts of returns new products may need to achieve. All of these things create your policy infrastructure that provides us within procurement and supply with a really clear set of ways of working. You'll note that none of these policies tell you what to do. What they're talking about is providing the guidance. The specific policies in your organization will give you that precision that you need. But what I'm trying to explain is the fact that it's really important that we have some guiding principles of clarity, transparency, and fairness, so that it is the easiest for our suppliers and our teams to operate in. So let's now move on to the whole idea of ethics, and this is such an important topic for us as procurement and supply professionals, and I will be unashamedly promoting the CIPS ethics test, which is fresh out this month. So I do urge you to go and have a look at that. But let's just take a step back again and reflect on ethics, and how do they work, and why are they important? Well, ethics aren't just a personal thing, they are a functional thing, and they are often and they are, to some extent formed by organizations as well. So really, organizations right at that kind of strategic level, organizations inform the culture that persists within an organization, and at that level determine how ethics will be embedded at that next functional level down. So the top of the organization sets the weather in terms of ethics. It's very difficult if ethics are not set at that level. So make yourself aware of what are the ethical statements of your organization. Make yourself aware of the ethical statements from your suppliers as well. It gives you a really good insight into what their top team, what their culture is in terms of ethics. At a functional level here within procurement and supply, and that's really the thing that I'm keen for us to think about, is that we will have our own particular ethics that will be embedded, and it will be informed by two sets of bits of information. One around the organisation culture and the ethical requirements of your particular organisation, but also it'll be informed by codes of conduct and potentially the CIPS ethics test as well. So there will be a set of ethics that will be very pertinent to how the ethical infrastructure plays out in our procurement and supply team. So there may be some very clear instructions within your organization about how individuals within procurement and supply conduct themselves with suppliers, for example. It's also informed by the CIPS Code of Conduct and the CIPS Ethics Test. So at its most basic level, we as individuals carry an ethical responsibility. Our Code of Conduct at CIPS sets out really clearly the behaviours and actions that we sign up to as individuals. So we sign up to, just so you know, standards of integrity, maintaining standards of our profession, legal compliance, and eradication of unethical practices. That's what we sign up to when we pay our subscription to CIPS. And that's what we need to think about when we are undertaking our work each day. And here's the plug for the CIPS ethics test. Now this is free with your membership, so hopefully I will be able to encourage you to do your ethics test. It's free learning. You get a lovely certificate, and it really will embed this whole kind of ethical principles for you and help you with your preparation for your exams that are coming up. Your ethics test is yours. It's in your name and not in your function's name and not in your organization's name. And this is your personal learning and your personal commitment to yourself in understanding what good ethics looks like, and making sure that you can continue to champion the importance of good ethical conduct within procurement and supply. So it is it's something that we therefore need to think about at a organization level, at a functional level, but also and very importantly at a personal level as well. So the next thing we need to think about, and this is a little diversion into L4M3, which I didn't have on my first list because this is just a tiny weeny area of compliance, and this relates to the labour standards, and this is highlighted in L4M3 section 3.2.2. And we refer to in the syllabus here standards that govern the minimum standard for workers in terms of working conditions, pay, and freedom of association. So what this means is that this is all about making sure that when you are thinking about the suppliers that you work with, that you are mindful of the working conditions of the staff within your suppliers or within your supply chain, that you're thinking about the pay and other working conditions of those individuals. Now, standards, we don't specify within our syllabus what standards they are. There are established standards that are provided by the UN, by the International Labour Organization, etc. And it might well be that your organization subscribes to those standards. And if that's the case, then it's important that you're aware of those. Standards must be interpreted to be meaningful. So you need to be thinking about, well, what does fair mean? So if we talk about fair pay, well, what does fair pay actually mean for your organization? How do you articulate and justify that notion of fairness? This is very much more about thinking about what fair pay is when you're trying to articulate that within your tender processes. Why we worry about labour standards is that it is part of our ethical principles and it's part of our ESG commitment. Recognizing that taking care of workers makes good business sense is really important. But suppliers are really keen to work with buyers that consider the welfare of their workers. So, you know, this makes you a standout organization in terms of making sure that your suppliers want to work with you. Recognizing different forms of external agency provides independence for your claims around how you do look after your workers and how you do assess those standards. And really, therefore, it does make things a lot more meaningful. So when you're coming to think about your revision, take a moment to think about the International Labour Organization and what they stand for. Think about what fair pay might look like. Think about working conditions. And freedom of association really is the right for workers to be able to create a union or some kind of workers collective. And just thinking about that in terms of its importance for workers. So the last area that I want to cover off is thinking about the control environment. And this really is to really try to think about, you know, the key controls that we worry about within procurement and supply. So those controls tends to be around either financial controls to make sure that things like fraud and bribery and all of those kinds of financial errors don't occur. And then there is some reporting frameworks that we need to think about in terms of compliance of things such as, you know, we were talking yesterday about waste and landfill or what have you. So let's just think about what kind of reporting frameworks are there and could there be. Some of these are statutory. So your audit, subject to the kind of sort of organization that you are, but audits are quite year-end audits, which are under our statutory requirements. So that's when your auditors, your financial auditors will come in and check your books are correct. But you can also audit suppliers and indeed your own organization in terms of the vision and mission that organizations have, the policy infrastructure, the processes that organizations undertake, and any external accreditations as well. Involving your suppliers in this sort of process is really helpful. Dialogue is much better than kind of testing suppliers as well. So if you're interested in running audits in your suppliers, then talk to your suppliers about doing that and what's the best process that can be used to collect the information. But actually, it's more about making sure that improvements can be secured from that information. So making sure the data is collected in a way that you can then put in place improvement programs for particular suppliers, and you can plot those improvements over time. The sorts of measures that you may want to implement within ESG reporting framework, you might measure things like wastage and how that changes over time. You might well measure the tonnage of wastage of particular raw materials, and you may see with the projects that you undertake with that ESG waste reduction actions that wastage is reduced significantly, or that wastage may well not be finding its way into landfill because it's being resold to a supplier that converts that wastage into another product. These are the sorts of measures that can be plotted over time. It's important to recognize that creating this data and gathering it and keeping it up to date is something that you need to think about, because as soon as you start to make these reporting frameworks something that you're committing to, is you need to make sure that you've got the resource to make sure that you continue to measure these things over time. So we've talked about wastage and how that can be measured in lots of different ways. We've talked about landfill use and potentially the reduction in landfill use, and that can be quantified in terms of numbers of tons of materials that don't find their way into landfill. but it can equally be quantified in a financial way when that landfill is, the costs of landfill are identified as well. There is a substantial piece of work that organisations undertake to look at CO2 and carbon footprints, and you may be involved in plotting those carbon footprints within your supply chains, measuring them, identifying areas for improvement, and plotting those changes over time are important ways of making sure that changes made within that ESG framework. It isn't that we measure ESG and shrug our shoulders and do nothing. Really, what we are seeking here is to improve the ESG infrastructure. So this is to make things better. So the projects that we would be thinking about would reduce wastage, would reduce landfill, would reduce the carbon footprint. And maybe we would be looking at non-compliance in lots of different ways. Maybe it is in all different sorts of measures that are relevant to your organization. So there are lots of different ways that you can create reporting frameworks that support ESG. When you do audits, it is worth thinking about, well, are you going to audit everybody? And if the answer is yes, you might well need to think about how are you going to prioritize the different organizations that you may be wanting to audit. So you're going to need to put a plan and a schedule in place and make sure that you've got the resources necessary to achieve that kind of audit plan that you've signed up to. It is important to make sure you've got action plans with key suppliers. You've got mechanisms to achieve performance feedback. You plot things as you move along, and really ask yourself sometimes the difficult question: has the audit made things better? And if it hasn't, really think about why that might be, and open those discussions with your suppliers. With regard to measures, it's all very well measuring these things and plotting change over time, but set yourself targets, report your performance, and for procurement and supply, socialize the progress, because when you show people that the benefits and the progress that you make, this is an important way of getting stakeholder commitment for further action. And that really does conclude the kind of areas where we need to think about changes to the level 4 syllabus. So I'm just going to summarize before we then move on to some exam reminders. So, scope of ESG. Yesterday we covered off environmental sustainability, waste management, and so on. Today we've looked at governance, etc. So that covers ESG. And as you can see, these things are very well socialized in CIPS. We haven't called things ESG in the past, but ESG really does form our environmental, social, and governance infrastructures, really, which are so important to how we do procurement in a sustainable way. So let's just pause now and just offer some exam reminders in these closing few minutes of this webinar. Okay, so we've got the exam booking window opening on the 23rd at 9 AM UK time. And just to remind you, the booking window is only open for 3 weeks. So you need to get your skates on to make sure you get the booking you want. So think about it in advance, because it would be a shame to be disappointed if you don't get the slot you want. Another thing just to remind you about is the constructive response exams, the CR exams, only run for 2 days in this next exam series in March. So you need to make sure that you know when that's going to be and that you book accordingly. So please make sure that you take the time to find out when those exam days are, and that you have prepared to sit those exams on those days, because there's not massive flexibility. Okay, let's now move on to just reminding everybody about what are these exams and what are we actually doing. in these exams. So this stuff I'm just about to cover off, this is by no means saying any of this is change. This is just reminders of the way that we run exams here at CIPS. This is not new information. I'm just making sure that you've got this stuff so that you're fully prepared for your preparation. So as a reminder, our objective response exams in level 4 always consist of 60 questions. There are 20 questions per learning outcome because there are 3 learning outcomes in each one of the OR exams. Okay. The questions require you to use this thing called reasoned judgment, which means you need to think quite hard about the scenario. So you're given quite a lot of time in the exam to think about each question. So just be cautious when you approach your exams and the answer jumps out at you. Read the question and the scenario really carefully to make sure that you pick the right answer based on this principle of reasonable judgment to identify the correct response to the given scenario. So read the scenario, read every single one of the options, reread the scenario if necessary before you make your selection. So make sure you've studied the syllabus as well. We have talked a lot about the syllabus, and hopefully as new level 4 learners, you will have engaged with the new syllabus. Please download it. We will send a link out to it as well for you, but make sure you've studied the syllabus and you know what is going to be required and covered in your exam. And then please do some reading and preparation prior to your exam so you're ready for it. So if we think about the objective response questions in a little bit more detail, pay clear attention to the language and linkage between the learning outcome, assessment criteria, and indicative content. What does that mean? So we've got here the learning outcome is the overarching learning outcome, and you'll see that on the syllabus, which is always the whole number, so it's 3.0 or whatever it is in terms of the syllabus that you're looking at. This 3.3 that you see here on the left hand side, this is an example of an assessment criteria, and then all of the indicative content will be the content will run 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, and so on. This is the indicative content, and what you need to do is you need to read the indicative content in relation to the assessment criteria. So let's just run together through this. So in this assessment criteria, identify the contributing factors supporting whole life asset management. So we're thinking here about the contributing factors that can help whole life asset management. So holding that idea in your head, we then think about, well, what might contribute to that? Well, the principles of triple bottom line, clearly, because that contributes to whole life asset management. Environmental factors, help you identify factors that will support whole life asset management. Sometimes environmental factors help, and sometimes they hinder. The way waste is managed also impacts this. The way packaging and packing is also managed helps whole life asset management. So does decommissioning, and so does the removal of or disposal, including closed loop disposal. Each of those elements impacts this whole idea of the contributing factors that support whole life asset management. So it's important to think about these things as a unit. So identify the command word as well, and in this case the command word here is identify. And what this means is, if you see the phrase identify, it means that you don't need to be an expert in all aspects of the decommissioning, but you will need to be expected to identify key aspects. So the key principles of these things, such as costs and resources. So bear in mind when you do this preparation that you're thinking about the syllabus, the command word and the indicative content as a unit while you're doing your preparation. Okay, moving on to the fantastic constructed response exams now. These are L4M1 and L4M8, and these are the traditional essay type exams. Just remember, we've got 4 learning outcomes in each one of the M1 and M8 syllabuses, and you have 4 constructed response questions. And a question will come from each one of those learning outcomes. So be prepared. We will ask you something about every part of the syllabus. So it's important to make sure that in your preparation, you acknowledge that and prepare accordingly. So take note of the command word. So the command word is the doing word, the outline or explain or analyze of the exam question. And in this way, this will make sure that you go into the required amount of detail when you're actually writing your exam question. So we've got this example here on the right-hand side of the first of this number 1, where you've got describe. That's giving details, setting out the key characteristics. That's all, if you will, the kind of lowest level of command word. Then you move up, which is a little bit further up, thinking about explain, giving reasons or an account for something so that it's easy to understand. So you're kind of explaining it and sort of in more detail. Then you may be asking to propose something, and that would be you would have to suggest the most appropriate answer based on a theory, based on a model, based on conditions or a particular case study. So this is where you assimilate knowledge and kind of put a suggestion together. And finally, you may well see questions that look at analyze, where you need to scrutinize a topic together with thoughts and judgments about that particular topic. So bear that in mind when you're when you're preparing for your exams, and make sure you're clear about what those command words mean so that you can respond correctly to the exam question. This question number, or this item number 3, is really important to me. Where possible in your CR exams, please give examples. Either pull those examples from the case study that you're given, or indeed pull those case studies. If you're not given a case study, then give examples from your own experience. They don't have to be they don't have to be very amazing examples, but showing how those examples work in practice is really important and shows a level of, the depth of your own understanding, which is what the examiners want to see. It's important to have a look at our sample questions as well. These are freely available on the CIPS website. I'm sure colleagues will send those as links in a moment if you haven't got them. Do take a look at them and think about why it is that those questions have been answered in the way that they have. One thing you will be asked to do in this set of exams coming up in L4M8 is you will be asked to calculate some things. We did a webinar on that last week. Be prepared to get the test reach calculator out. I know we've got some resources to support that. Make sure if you're asked to calculate something, you do, and you show you're working so that you can gather the marks to show just how much you know around the finance piece as well. Great. The next piece is with that, hopefully I finished on time. Yes, with 4 minutes to spare. I am just wondering if there is any Q&A. I can't see
Hello.
any. Hello.
Hi. Hi,
Oh,
Fiona.
hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. That was great. Thank you. We've had quite a lot of questions coming in on the Q&A while you've been delivering your presentation. Thank you. The team have answered the majority of them. I'm just looking at the screen now. We have covered most of the questions as we've gone along. There are a couple of things that I think it would be handy just to clear up while we have got a couple of minutes. The first question is around e-learning and study guides. We've had a question from someone who's wanting to understand what's the difference between the study guides and the e-learning, and I thought that would just be a really good beneficial question just to
Yes,
clear that up for
absolutely.
everyone.
So the study guides are exactly what they say on the tin. This is a book. Now you can either have it in ebook format or in hard copy format. This is a guide. It's a 200 odd page book that deals with section by section, deals with the syllabus. It's a guide, not a revision textbook or what have you. So it is something that will guide your revision or guide your preparation, but it's not the only thing you need to be looking at. You need to be referring to other materials, CIPS materials, other textbooks, recommended reading, and so on. So that's the study guide, and you can get that in hard copy format or in ebook format. The e-learning is, if you like, a very much kind of boiled down version of the key elements of the learning of a particular module or topic or what have you. So in many ways, I wouldn't rely. So if you're asking me, would you rely on e-learning as a mechanism to prepare for your exams? In my view, that's not sufficient detail for you to prepare from your exams just using e-learning. You will need to engage with other sorts of resources in addition to e-learning. It's a great thing to do in addition to other preparation and a fantastic way to practice some of your thinking, but used in combination with other materials.
Yes, so not to be used in isolation, definitely an additional support resource to the study guides.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah. And in addition to that, everyone, as well, we've been posting links to the Intelligence Hub, the Code of Ethics, the Ethics e-learning, where you'll find that. Just for the benefit of everybody on the call, your e-learning, when you're a member, your e-learning is automatically uploaded into your My Learning account in My CIPS. So you simply log in, you go down the left-hand tab, there's a link there called My Learning, and you'll go straight into our learning management system, and it's there. So it's really easy for you to access that ethics and e-learning. We do update that every year. It's just little tweaks and changes as we go along. There was one question about, I've just done the ethics e-learning test in November. Do I need to do it again? No, you don't need to do it again. It is a recommendation that it's an annual piece of learning for you to keep up to date and to keep fresh. So there's not a need to go back and do it again, but it is updated automatically for you.
It is, but if I could just suggest that it is there as a resource. So even though you might not need to do the test, the learning's there for you. So if you're needing some extra materials to support you with your preparation for your exams, go back and have a look at it. You don't have to do the test, but certainly there's some really good information in there that can support your learning and really get you thinking too. So just because you've done your exam, it's still a really valuable piece of learning in its own right.
We've had a couple of questions as well about the pass marks
Yeah, I've
for
seen
an
that. Yeah.
OR exam, CR exam. So just to clarify for everybody, CR exams, all of them are 50% pass mark. OR exams, all of them 70% pass mark. Yeah. So that's the same across the 3 diploma levels there. And I think the only other question that we've had, and that's actually just been answered on the chat right now by Luke, and I think that was around the command words. Now, we've recently updated a document and pulled out the command words from our guidance document for constructed response exams. So there is a more up-to-date version that was updated about 6 months ago, and that is available in the useful resources link on the exam resources page, and we've shared links to that in the chat and on the Q&A today. But what we will do is all of the links that we've shared in the webinar today, everything that's been identified as really helpful. You're asking us these questions, we're going along. We're going to include that in the email that we will send out to you shortly after the webinar, probably tomorrow now, as we download the recording and get it ready up to add to our YouTube playlist, along with all of the other recordings as well. So by the end of this week, possibly Monday at the latest, you'll have all of these 4 videos that we've run over the past 2 weeks in order, loaded up onto our YouTube channel, ready to help you prepare for your exams in March.
Brilliant. Thank you, Becky. So hopefully that's really useful. Just a couple of final remarks from me before we finish. Any other topics that you would like to see? So we have put a little questionnaire there for you. Would you please kindly, if there's something you'd want us to do, you know, this is your chance to write down what you'd like. We're going to take that information away. While you're thinking about that, a couple of reflections, please. The best exam results are achieved by those people that take time to prepare. So give yourselves the opportunity to do the best work you can by starting to prepare early. So it's great that you've joined us before the exam booking window has opened, and I'm really pleased that you joined us today. But keep keep the faith and keep studying now. So get hold of your resources, make sure that you've got your syllabus, get your study plans in place so that you can really make the best use of your study time between now and your exams. We see all the time that the people that take the time do really well, pass first time, and manage to move through the syllabus much more rapidly. So my suggestion is start early, and if there are other questions, please, you've got all of all of the links to CIPS. We are here to help you and support. Tell us what else you need to hear from us, and we will look forward to working with you as the weeks and months progress. Thank you so much for your time and attention today. Thank you so much, team, for all of your hard work. Very best wishes to everybody sitting exams in March. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.